Incoming message.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats. We're actually adopting the role of cold case investigators to review the forensic patterns of evidence behind some seemingly supernatural events. You know, usually when we hear about urban legends, we just assume they have a single source, right? Creative storytelling. We easily dismiss them as campfire tales or, internet creepypastas. But today we're going to look at the data differently. We're opening up the dossier on cases that are honestly far too specific, way too consistent, and just way too widespread to be mere invention. Here's the investigator's dilemma. True hoaxes, by their very nature, distort and embellish over time. It's like a giant game of telephone. The message always warps. Yet the specific cases we're going to review today remain logically and forensically consistent across decades, and sometimes even centuries. Think about it. If someone were making these up, they definitely add their own little flourish, right? Some aggressive, dramatic flair, but they don't. And that leads us to a pretty pivotal question. What exactly happens when a myth leaves a recognizable, totally unchanging forensic footprint? Well, it forces us to reevaluate our entire definition of the phenomenon. All right, let's dive right into this by establishing our strict criteria for today's audit. We are prioritizing cold, hard data over popular supernatural explanations. And to do that, we absolutely have to separate verifiable documented incidents from speculative internet lore. We're looking exclusively at primary witness reports that are backed by the historical record. Basically, we're actively filtering out all the noise of modern embellishments so we can classify the true strength of each independent report. If it doesn't meet this incredibly high evidentiary bar, it just doesn't make it into our dossier today. So here is our dossier agenda for today. First, timeline anomalies. Second, behavioral profiling. Third, an unsolved crime spree. And finally, reclassifying records. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Timeline anomalies. Tracing the extra-dimensional MO. Let's open up Case File A and examine the entity popularly known as Slenderman. Now, this is a perfect example of a phenomenon we think we understand just because of its modern digital footprint. But as investigators, we really have to look past the recent headlines and track the MO backward through the historical record. While popular culture absolutely insists this figure was created on an internet forum back in 2009, this timeline tracks a completely unbroken pattern of sightings spanning 3 centuries, and across vastly diverse geographical locations, too. In the 1700s in Bavaria, there were widespread primary reports. Fast forward to the 1950s in isolated areas of Australia, and we see reports of a figure matching the exact same description. And then, of course, the 2009 explosion online. The timeline anomaly here is just glaring. The digital age didn't invent this entity. It literally just crowdsourced the reporting of it. And this brilliantly illustrates the logical inconsistency in the hoax theory. The 1700s accounts of what was called the extremely wretched man perfectly match the modern physical description. Just look at the data points from the original primary reports. A figure that is impossibly tall, faceless, wearing black attire, appearing in isolated forests. It causes sudden panic, and then it just disappears. It is completely identical to the modern lore. This proves the internet merely named an existing phenomenon. Think about it. A hoaxer in 2009 could not possibly have retroactively planted identical historical descriptions into 18th century Bavarian records. Well, unless they had a time machine, in which case they definitely have bigger fish to fry than internet forums.
Moving right along to Section 2, behavioral profiling, the consistency problem.
Let's open up Case File B. We're shifting our forensic audit away from physical descriptions and focusing on the incredibly specific behavioral rituals of the black-eyed children. When you're dealing with human behavior, inconsistencies are usually the ultimate hallmark of a fabricated story. Perfect consistency, on the other hand, that demands our analytical attention. By comparing reported descriptions against known regional folklore archetypes, we can easily see the difference between myth and record. Hoaxers and storytellers naturally add aggressive, dramatic flair. Honestly, if you were making up a scary monster, you'd probably make it attack, right? But these independent witness reports of black-eyed children share details that are far too specific and rigidly polite. The behavior is totally identical across reports, the motivation is completely restricted to this strict permission-asking ritual, and the appearance never fluctuates. It's always solid black eyes, no whites, no pupils. This breaks literally every rule of traditional, organically evolving folklore. Now, what's really fascinating here is the contrast between the explosion of speculative anecdotal reporting in 2006 against the baseline of verifiable original documented incidents that actually started a full decade earlier in 1996. That 2006 spike That represents internet virality, which, as we know, often muddies the waters for investigators. But when we strip away that speculative explosion and just look at the verifiable incidents from 1996, the core forensic details remain utterly unchanged. Across hundreds of independent reports from incredibly diverse geographical locations, this strict behavioral MO remains perfectly consistent. It's always children, completely black eyes, polite dialogue patterns, a bizarre, extremely strict permission-asking ritual to enter a home or a vehicle, and crucially, immediate departure upon refusal. Guys, this is a forensic overlap that would require an absolutely impossible level of coordination to fake. You have people across the globe claiming they've never even heard of the urban legend, all reporting the exact same dialogue scripts and behavioral tics. That level of coordination would require a conspiracy way more complex than the phenomenon itself. Section 3. Unsolved Crime Spree. 50-year pattern. All right, let's open our final dossier. Case File C. We are analyzing Spring-Heeled Jack as a verifiable crime pattern. We're going to treat this not as some Victorian ghost story, but exactly as what the data suggests it is, a long-term, verifiable, and entirely unsolved crime pattern. Using annotated vintage map overlays, we can actually pinpoint the geographical density of the primary witness reports. This wasn't just some vague rumor from a distant countryside. No, this started with a highly concentrated cluster of incidents right in London in 1837. We literally have dozens of official police reports and witness testimonies mapping out a very real, very physical presence in the city streets. So, the crucial point here is contrasting the highly specific physical evidence described by witnesses against the psychological commonalities of the encounter sites. If this was just a series of copycat hoaxes, you would expect wild inconsistencies. Someone would describe a ghost, someone else a demon. But instead, the physical descriptions are remarkably grounded and specific. Instead of vague phantoms, witnesses reported a figure dressed in black, wearing a metal breastplate, and utilizing what appeared to be mechanical legs that allowed for inhuman jumps. Frankly, it sounds less like a ghost and way more like a Victorian supervillain. They specifically targeted dark alleyways to induce terror and executed impossibly rapid escapes, sometimes vaulting right over rooftops or just vanishing seamlessly into crowds. And here is the real kicker. Every single independent report matched the exact same abilities, targets, and methods for exactly 50 years. 50 years of identical suspect descriptions. That essentially confirms this as a persistent, structured crime pattern rather than some morphing urban legend. I mean, think about it. No single hoaxer operates for half a century without ever changing their methodology, aging out of the physical requirements of the crime, or, just making a mistake and getting caught. Finally, Section 4, Reclassifying Records, the Final Audit. As we close this explainer and finalize our dossier review, we really must use our cold data to challenge modern urban legend theory. We have to be willing to look at the historical record without the bias of modern skepticism, filtering out data points just because they make us a little uncomfortable. Urban legends become distorted. They get embellished. They change to fit the fears of the current generation. But the incidents that remain perfectly consistent across centuries, across independent sources, and across global boundaries, those are historical records. We simply lack the scientific vocabulary to explain them right now. We're just calling them myths because, well, it's a really convenient filing cabinet for data we don't know how to process. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought as you review the evidence we've covered today. What other unsolved historical data patterns are sitting right in front of us, falsely dismissed as campfire myths? If the extra-dimensional MO of the 1700s, the behavioral profiling of the 1990s, and the Victorian crime sprees are actually verifiable records, it fundamentally changes how we must view history. So keep your eyes on the data, investigators, and never assume a story is just a story until you've thoroughly checked for a forensic footprint.
Come to me!